Hey guys, CP here, bringing you another tutorial on JavaScript. Today we'll be taking a look at developing this app, an IP address tracker app. So what it does is it will take the IP address that you put in here and then do a lookup using ipify.org, and then the information provided there, it will change this or update this information with the information returned from ipify.org, and also it update this map. This map is leaflet.js. It update this map and pinpoint the location of that IP provided. Let's quickly see this in action. So if I put in here an IP address at 8.8.8 and I click on the search button over here, so what it will do is, you guys can see, it updated the information here provided right here on top, which is the location, the time zone, and also the ISP, and also the map updated to pinpoint the Google head offices. So with no longer ado, guys, let's quickly jump into this tutorial. So in order for us to get started with this application over here, what you guys are going to need to do is head on over to ipify.org, register a free account there because you need an API key to access the endpoint. And once you have your API key, we will use that to get this output from the endpoints. And what this output returns, you guys will see it's the API, which is the one that we display over here, and also the location. And what you're going to use is the country, the city, the latitude and longitude to update the map, the time zone, and also right at the bottom the ISP, because that's the information that we use to update this information and also the map. So quickly head on over there, sign up for your API, and once you have done that, let's get back to this tutorial. Okay, so I take it you guys have signed up for your API with ipify.org. Next thing we need to do is head on over to Leaflet. Leaflet is what we're going to use to generate our map. So it's an open source JavaScript library for interactive maps. Quickly, what you're going to need from here is just to link the CSS and also link the JavaScript. So if you go and head on over here, take a look at my HTML file. Let me just make this a bit smaller and this side a bit bigger. So if we look at my HTML file over here, I already linked my CSS file over there, which is my leaflet CSS, and down here I've linked my JavaScript file for my leaflet, for my map to work. And as required over here, you need a map with an ID, an identifier ID that the JavaScript can attach itself to, and I've done that over here on my side, and I call it display map. Okay, and with my HTML, quickly I've linked to my font that I'm using. Is called Rubik, the font that I'm using on this app, and also to my CSS file. I'm quickly gonna go through it now in a short while, and my JavaScript file here at the bottom, where we'll be spending most of our time today. Quickly to go over the HTML, I have my form over here. If I go back to this one, which is that form over there, I have my title over here, which is an H1, and then I have my div, which I call it the result display, which is this container of this section over here, and I have each of those sections as a separate div, because I'm going to need those IDs where I can update the information I currently have in there. So at the moment I just have hard-coded values, but as I've said, when you get to the JavaScript part, we're gonna update this using the response that we get from the API. Sorry, I think that's it for the HTML. Let's head on over to the CSS quickly, and then we'll take a look at the JavaScript. So my CSS is straightforward. I do a reset of everything using the wildcard over here, and then my body, I just set my font over there that I want to use, a default font size with the colors that I want to use for my default font. I style my H1, and for my background image over here, which is this image, I use this background and I call it in my app assets pattern.png. And then anything I need to point out to you guys is over here, display container, which is this guy over here. So as you guys see, I use flex, and then I just align my item center, justify content center, margin top -60 to do that overlap over there. Then I give it a width of 80%, as you guys can see, so that I can have that nice looking space over there and space on this side as well, and I do my margin left auto and margin right auto, so it pushes itself to the center of the page always. And I think that's it that I need to point out in my CSS. As with all my tutorials, guys, this file it's in my GitHub, so there's a link in this description where you guys can go ahead and download the complete project. You just need to replace you just need to replace something in the JavaScript with your API, and the app should work on your side as well. But that's it for the CSS. Let's head on over to the fun part, which is the JavaScript. Okay, so heading on over to the JavaScript, let me close the CSS, open up my JS tracker quickly to go over this. So what I've done is I've already set up some default variables that I'm going to use. I didn't want to do this in the video as it adds to the length of this video, and I don't want it to be too long. I'm just going to go through it quickly to explain to you guys what's happening over here. So I've set up a variable called secret API, which is where you replace the string, enter your API with the API that you got from Ipify, which you got from Ipify. And then I've done this bypass course URL over here, which is course-hero.coapp.com. So basically why I have this URL and also this section over here is because I am on localhost. I'm using localhost to run my app at the moment, and due to localhost I'm unable to pull the information from my API because it's giving me those cores invalid error where it says no, my cores are not the same, so I don't have access to the API. But I'm just using this URL over here to bypass that. So what this URL does, it allows me to bypass that error. It creates cores in my request, and then I'm able to retrieve the information, the output. As you guys see over here, I'm able to retrieve that output. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And then what I've done is I've set up the API URL, which is the API root over here, and the current version. The reason why I broke it up like this is because at a later stage, let's say you want to deploy this app, and then you can easily get rid of this variable over here. And then if the version should change or something in the near future, you don't have to go look everywhere where you are using the URL through the app. You can just go over here to say current version, update it to version 2 or update it to version 3. Okay, and then I went ahead and set my my elements over here that I'm going to update. So I've done my document get element by ID, current IP, which is the span over here. That's all the current IP, current town, it's that span, current zone, it's that span, and current ISP is that span. Because I know once the information is retrieved from Ipify, I want to update that information. So I'm going to set it in HTML for the spans, and that's why I have that over there. What I've done over here, I went and fetched my entered IP from this input over here, document element by ID, IP address, and then I've set up a variable for my button, which is this click button over here, because I want to add a click event to it. Okay, I've already explained this headers option over here for you, which is access control allow origin, wildcard allow everything, because I'm passing that also through in my fetch request. I'm using fetch on this one. I'm not using Axios or Ajax, I'm just using fetch. And then quickly for the map setup over here, if we go to Leaflet, getting started quickly, you guys will see over here what they have done is they create a variable called map, and then they use this l.map over here to identify the div that you guys want to use, and then set this view and pass through the coordinates for the default view and then the zoom level. So this is basically the same thing that I've done over here. So what I've done is just I've said okay, get the div with the ID display map, and then the options over here, basically what they are is that I want the map on default load to be centered, I want my zoom level to be 0, and then I've added this layer. If you guys scroll down over here, you guys will see in the documentation that this tile layer is what is needed in order to generate the map, and it comes with this little map data href, which is that thing here at the corner, which is those information right there at the bottom, which is this information over here. Okay, but it's needed for the map to be generated. And the reason why I've done it this way is that I'm gonna create a function where I pass through a latitude and a longitude, and then I want the map to use that new latitude and longitude to update its location when I update or when I search for an API. Okay, so now let's get to the interesting parts of this entire tutorial, where we actually start writing code and not explaining it. Okay, so let's head on over to the part where we stop explaining code and actually start writing it. So firstly, I'm going to write a function, and this function is going to have a one param. Okay, so what I'm going to do is the following. I'm just going to do an arrow function over here. So what this function is going to do is on initialize. So when the page loads, I want this function to create my map and also set the default marker. Okay, so in my param, I'm going to say update. Let's call it update marker, and my update marker, I'm going to set a default latitude and longitude, which is just going to be an array of 42, 42. I have no idea where this is, but I do think it's in the middle of the ocean somewhere. And then my next step is going to be, let's use the map variable that we've set over here, and what I'm going to do is set a view to it. Okay, so set a view. Quickly head on over to the documentation of Leaflet.js. You guys will see over here, when you set up a new map, it requires you to set a view, and you pass through the latitude and longitude of the location you want the pin to be at, and also the zoom level. So that's what I'm doing over here. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to pass it through over there. Let me just go and pass it through over there, and then my zoom level is going to be 13. So whatever this is, so whenever I use this later, from the API request, from the response I get from the API, I want to use that latitude and longitude and pass it through here so that this map will update. Okay, hope that makes sense. And then the next thing that we want to do is say L dot marker. So I'm setting a marker on the map, and what I'm going to do is a L dot marker is also going to be this latitude and longitude that I will be passing through over here. And then I'm just going to say add it to map. So add it to the variable called map, and I think that's it with this. So quickly to explain again, what's happening over here is that I'm setting the view of the map, which is the latitude and longitude passed through here. So it's more or less this view that's going to display, and then I'm setting the marker to be on that pinpoint over there, as you guys can see it over here. So whatever variable, or sorry, whatever value I pass through this param, it's what's going to be updated or displayed in the mark. That's the location that's going to be displayed in the map. Okay, so quickly, the next step we're going to go to is also create a function. So what this function is going to do is, this is the function that's actually going to get the IP address that's been inserted in here. I want to click on the button, and then it's going to take that IP address, call the API, and then get the request from the API and update those views or updates the spans over here. Okay, so let's quickly do that. I'm going to call this one get IP details. Okay, so I'm just going to also do an arrow function for this one, and then I'm going to pass through a variable called default underscore IP. And then what I want to do inside of this function, I'm going to do an if statement firstly. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to check that someone actually passed through an IP address, and if so, I'm going to have to link a section of this URL over here. I'm going to quickly show you guys now what I mean with the section of that URL. In that URL, it has a last section that says IP address, and then you need to put through the IP address. If there's no IP address requested in the URL, if there's no IP address in the URL, param in the URL, it will try to determine your IP address, your PC's IP address, and then return that information. Okay, so on initialize, when the app loads, I actually wanted to load your PC's IP address and return your location. But as soon as you put in an IP address, I wanted to return the location of the information of the IP address entered. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's quickly do that. So I'm going to say if default, which is what I've just said there, is equal to undefined. So if this is undefined, meaning that nothing was passed through, do the following. So I'm going to do the following else, meaning that someone did put in an IP into this input over here, and click the button and do this. Okay, so the only thing I'm doing over here, I'm just going to create a URL variable. So I'm just going to say variable IP URL is equal to. So let's quickly build that up. So first things first is going to be equal to this one. This is going to be the first one. This is going to be the second one, and then the version. Okay, and then my IP address. Okay, API key. Sorry, and then my API key, and then also are we requesting an IP address, or are we not requesting an IP address? Okay, let's build it up quickly. So I'm going to use this backticks over here, and I'm going to use $that for variables in a string, because I'm going to have some string in here, and I don't want to go ahead. I can write it out like this. Let me quickly show you. You can go ahead and say copy that. I can say to that, which is a variable, and then I can say plus, and then I can go ahead and say concatenate this guy, and then I can say plus, then I go say quotation marks and say API key, which actually needs to be a question mark, and then say API key is equal to, and then say plus. Now you see how all these pluses can get confused, and you end up writing something that you won't be able to track really on what is happening here. So what this backticks allows us to do is the following. We can do the same thing when we're going to say $. So what this $, declares, it says, okay, I'm going to pass through a variable in here instead of a string. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say $that, which is $bypass quotes URL, and also API URL. I'm going to say $pass through another variable. Sorry, this should be inside the tick over here. Let's put that one over there. And then I'm going to say version. The same over here, say $, which is the version, and then right after the version, what I need is to say question mark API key. Okay, so my API key is going to be equal to secret API key over there. Then I can say $. Do you see how readable this is? It makes much more sense to just put everything between those backticks over there. This if it's undefined, and I'm going to stop this over here. But if someone put through an IP address, sorry about that, someone put through an IP address, we want to do the same thing, want to declare the variable again, but at the end, what we want to do is then add another param, a URL param to this, and it's going to be IP address, and the IP address is going to be equal to whatever was passed through over here. Okay, so $, let's put that through. Okay, so this is the only reason why we're using this if statement, because on initial load we're not going to have any value over here, and I wanted to try to load your IP, or your PC's IP, and return that information. But once you put through an IP, what I wanted to do is then use that IP and return the information of that IP address. Okay, so next thing that you want to do is you want to use this IP URL to do the fetch request. So I'm going to use the fetch API. So I'm going to say fetch. What I'm fetching is a IP URL over there, and I'm passing through this headers options as an option. Reason for that, as I've explained earlier, is because of that CORS issue I was receiving, and I couldn't get a request, I couldn't get the data back from my endpoint because I'm on localhost. So this is just to bypass that. Okay, and then what I'm going to say, .then, which means once that is run, once you get a response, I'm going to just say results arrow function, say results.json. So convert them to JSON, and once you've converted them to JSON, then I'm gonna say that then I'm gonna say take the data. Now I'm gonna work with the data, and for now I'm just gonna say console.log the data received, and then what we can add to this is a catch. So I can just say catch. So what the catch does, it will catch any errors. So I can say catch any errors, and should there be an error, just do alert. Please enter a valid IP address. Okay, so if there was any errors received during this fetch or during the request for this information, it will run this catch over here when it's gonna add this error, which is gonna just say please enter a valid IP. I can actually log this out if you wanted to see what is the error. If you are running to any errors that you may need to go ahead and check it out and then just correct those errors over there. Okay, but for now I think this is going to work. And now we can quickly go ahead and work within this section, which is the data section. So this section is actually when we have received the JSON data. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, let me just do this, add curly braces. So the first thing I want to do, as I've said, I want to update the view. Okay, so I'm going to get the spams and I'm going to output the information into the spams. Okay, because I already set those spams up over here. I can just go ahead and copy that and say this guy is going to be equal to data.ip. Okay, so if you guys are wondering where am I getting this, let me quickly show you. So if I quickly go back down here, you guys will see it returns a JSON or an object, and in that object, so this data is basically this entire object that you guys see over here. So I can enter this data object by just saying .ip, which is this one over there. So I can access the IP using the .ip over there. But if I want the current town, let's quickly go there. I'm just gonna say, first things first, this is incorrect. I should current IP dot inner HTML is equal to that, and I'm gonna say current town dot inner HTML is equal to data dot, so I'm looking for the city, so I'm gonna say data dot location, which is that guy over there, dot city over there. Okay, so you guys see how I actually go into the object, into that object's object to retrieve the data. Okay, so just to recap, this data over here is this entire object returned. Okay, so then I have an access to say, okay, I have access to this location because it's part of this object and it's in this high class over here, so I can receive it like that, and I can go inside of that object and go retrieve city. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing with this is actually current city, so I'm gonna do the same thing with that. What I wanted to display, if you go back to the app, it's the city, and I want to display the country and also the zip code. So I want to display the city, the country, and also the where's the postal code. So I need those three in this one line. So what I can do is, let me go ahead and say data.location like that. I'm gonna say plus, I can just copy this, make a space there, and then just make another space because there's gonna be three of them. So I already have the city. Now I'm looking for the country, which is location.country, and then I'm looking for the postal code over there, which is then this guy. Okay, so that's my town. We can do it like this, but now all of this is just going to be one long string if you output it here without the spaces there. So in order to get the spaces, I'm going to need to say plus, and I'm going to say quotation mark with a space inside, and then add another plus. We can do that way, or the other way, we can do it the same way we constructed this URL here on top. We can get rid of the pluses. Okay, and then what we can do is just add a backtick over there, add a backtick over there, and over here just add a dollar, and declare this as a variable. So I can do that, and I'm just gonna make a space. Same with this one. So it's gonna account for the space created over here where it outputs it in the front end. Okay, I can do that. Same thing goes over here. Okay, put that curly brace over there. So now I have my spaces. Okay, so I have my current town. Next one up is my current zone. So I can go over here and say current zone dot inner HTML is equal to, let's go back to this one. So that's my zone over there. I can go ahead and say data dot location dot time zone. Okay, and then lastly is my ISP. That I can go and say paste dot inner HTML is also equal to data dot ISP. The reason why I can do that is because that's also a higher level over there, so it's not inside of another object. You see, that's why I can just pull that information straight from there, and they are strings, so I don't need to do any string conversion to it. Okay, so now we have updated this section. Will update this view over here. So the next thing that you want to do, as I've said, is update the map. Okay, so how are we gonna go about updating the map? We're gonna use this function created here right on top, which is update map. We're gonna use that and pass through the latitude and longitude to this map. So let's go ahead and grab that function, and let's say paste, and then what I'm passing through, it's an array. Okay, so my array is gonna be, let's go back to this return. What we want is those two, the latitude and longitude over there. So I'm gonna say data dot location dot, first one is lat, and my second one is going to be data dot location dot lng. Okay, so now I'm passing through that information to this map, so I'm recalling this function. So now this function is going to run again, but it's not going to use this default information provided to it. It's going to use the information I've inserted in here, and then my map should update, my map view should update, and also my marker should update. Okay, guys, still with me? And I think that's it for this get IP details function. The next thing that you want to do now is hook it up to say what we need to do is run it on default. So first thing is run this one once the page loads. So we can go ahead and either do this, call it right down there, call that function. So the JavaScript will read, and then when it gets to this part, it'll say, okay, you want me to initialize this function, and then it's going to run this function and then carry out what it needs to do. Because what I wanted to do is, as I've said, I wanted to get your PC's IP and just try to pinpoint your location on the map and also show your information over here until you've entered a valid IP address. Okay, that's what I'm doing over there. And then what I'm going to do also, I'm just going to do a document.load. So document.add event listener. So what I'm doing over here, I'm saying that once the document has loaded, I want you to run this update marker function. So I want you to update this map. I want you to run this map function so that the map will generate once the page has loaded. Okay, the reason why I'm not doing this function the same as this one is because I've noticed that this function takes a bit longer to run. Okay, so while this one is waiting for the page to load, I don't want this one to wait for the page to load. I want it to run instantly, because it's making a request to another website or a endpoint and needs to retrieve information, which takes a bit longer than the update marker one. It just needs to show me a map with a marker. Let's hook up this button over here, so when someone enters something over here, click this button and then also show me the information of that IP address over here. And that we will do using the search button and adding an event listener to it. So I can say add event listener. Yes, you guys must have guessed it correctly. The event we are listening to is the click event. And once someone has clicked this button, we want to run this function over here. Okay, so why I'm passing through this in is so that I can do a e.prevent default. Okay, the reason for that is because it's a form. Once you click this button, the page refreshes automatically, but if I use this prevent default, then the page won't refresh. So let's quickly do an if statement. So what our if statement is going to do, we want to check if you actually provided a IP address. If not, to show you alert to say enter a valid IP address. But if you provided an IP address, and then just run this other function you wanted to run. Okay, so let's go ahead and say entered IP, which is this field over here. It's this input over here. So I'm entered IP, because I entered IP dot value. So its value, if its value is not equal to blank, and entered value dot its value, entered IP dot its value, that input value is also not equal to null, and then you can run run the below for me, and then just return, meaning that stop the execution of this function. If this if statement is not correct, so this entered value is actually blank or it is null, then just do an alert. I'm not gonna be fancy with this one. I'm just gonna do alert. I'm gonna say please enter a valid IP address. So I'm thinking this alert over here is actually wrong. What I wanted to say here on top is actually, let's say, oops, something went wrong. Yeah, so something went wrong, and this one will say please enter a valid IP address, and then do jump out of this entire event over here. Okay, but if this is correct, what we wanted to do is say I want you to call this function, this get IP details function, and what I'm going to pass through is this guy's value, which means pass through the IP provided over there for me. And then once that is passed through, this function is going to run. It's going to see that this default is not undefined, so it's going to do this one. It's going to pass it through. It's going to say the IP address provided is the one provided by the client, and then it's going to go do a lookup for that one. Okay, I hope you guys followed along. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, go ahead and add a comment below. I will surely reply to your comments. And if you guys like this type of videos, please like this video, and also click on the bell notification. Once you subscribe to my channel, click on the bell notification so that you get notified the next time I publish another video like this or similar to this one. Thank you guys for watching. Until next time, stay safe.